But in religion, it is not only to be understood intellectually or believed just for the sake of saying that I believe this, but it has to be implemented in life. So, the ideas of Vedanta, when it illumines my life, then I can shed that illumination to somebody else. If they have not illumined, if they have not lit the lamp here, then this is not then useful for anybody else to light the lamp with. That is how the preaching and practice of Vedanta should go on, and that has been how it has been carried on by great sages. The definition of a saint in Vedanta is very different from what is understood in Catholic hierarchy, that they have an idea of saint, one who performs at least 2 miracles. Then that person can be given a sainthood, but that is not how Vedanta describes a saint. In Taittiriya Upanishad, there comes a very beautiful, most sublime idea about who is a saint. The word in Sanskrit is very similar in sound. Probably it is derived from the same root that went into Latin and then get called saint. It is Santa. Santa means the one who has found the underlying existence. It comes from this idea, Sat means exists. That which is existence. One who has seen that all-pervading existence, that person is saint. Otherwise, that person, the Upanishad says very categorically, Asanne vasa bhavati asad brahmeti veda chet santam asti brahmeti veda chet santamenam tato viduriti. That is how this line goes. Asanne vasa bhavati. The person himself, the individual who denies this all-pervading existence of Brahman, and that becomes non-existent. Asaneva sabhavati. You are denying your own existence. And that is how in Vedanta there is the proof of existence of God is given. What is the proof of existence of God? The one who is asking for it is the proof of it. That the one who is asking, where is God? That person himself or herself is the proof that God is. That is what is using this body, this mind, to express itself. It is. So if you deny that, then you are kind of denying your own existence. Asti brahmeti ched veda. If somebody sees this all-pervading, one without second existence in everything, santamenam tato viduriti. So that person is called a santa. And so each of us is potentially a santa, a saint, because we all have that same existence. Only we have to see it, that's all. Each one of us is therefore a saint in making. It is, we might not have recognized it now, but it is just a matter of recognition. Therefore, in Kashmiri Shaivism, this beautiful phrase is used for that, pratyabhijna, means recognition. And that you just recognize your true nature. It is already there. but you recognize that you are that. Pratyabhijna Shastra, therefore that is called the science of recognizing oneself. So that is another statement that Ayam Atma Brahma, that this is that. And Swami Vivekananda therefore says, and what a great statement it is. He has said that in his short discourse given at Belur Math before he departed for the second trip to United States, to the Western world in general. So, before leaving Belur Math, the inmates there, those who were brahmacharis and sannyasis and other close devotees, they had to given a farewell to Swami Vivekananda, and he gave this discourse at that time. And only it was a short discourse, and again it is only some notes of it have been preserved and given in the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. And the title of that lecture is Sannyasa, its ideal and practice. I love to read it again and again. Very important, and I request you all to read it. It is, every sentence of it is filled with so much meaning and useful stuff for us. There he mentions that gone are all those past sages. And with them all those rishis are gone, and with them are gone their opinions as well. Now each of you must become a rishi. Each of us has to become a rishi. That is where again let me highlight the difference with physical science. In physical science, everybody who reads it doesn't have to become a scientist really. It is, we don't verify those truths really. We just, even the most simple things that we learn in high school, that combining hydrogen and oxygen makes water. We read it in books. Tell me how many of you have really done it? Hardly you will find a person who has actually done it, because it is not considered necessary. But in religion, each of each person has to perform this experiment in one's own life and realize the truth. Those rishis had realized, they'll illumine their lives with that. And just, I cannot just keep on basking in that borrowed glory. I have to experience it myself. Each of us has to become a rishi. Means rishi, the word is so beautiful. The one who sees the truth is called rishi. We see, but we don't see. How much time is there? Okay, almost over. So let me tell you a story about seeing. There is, I had read this story in my primary school days, but I still love this story, and it is very illuminating story so far as our way of seeing goes. It is an old lady was cleaning the grains that she had. There was, as usually it happens, there are some little stones mixed in that. So she was taking them out, and then a monkey was watching it. The lady, being old, has her eyesight a little bit weakened, so it was a bit tedious work. So a monkey wanted to take all those grains. So he had a trick up his sleeves. So this big monkey comes down and says, "Oh Grammy, I see you are finding it very difficult to, get these stones out of this. but I have these glasses. I will lend you these glasses. As soon as you put them on, you will see them very clearly separate, The stones will be completely separated from the grain. And your job will be very easy. But you have to give something to me. What do I need to give you? Well, just the stones that you were anyway going to throw, is it not? And the old lady had no objection to that. So, and then as soon as she put on those specs, it became so clear. But she was so surprised that, wow, this has so many stones. What happened was that lady was seeing the grain as stone and stone as grain. And you can imagine what she was left with, only the stones. That is what we see, friends. That is what we see. Let us understand this. We see things which don't exist. The names and the forms. And miss the substance. Is it really to be called seeing? And that is why Jesus requests, Jesus says, let those who have eyes, let them see. What a profound statement it is. That we don't use our eyes don't see. Our eyes see that which is not real. Let us train our eyes to see that which is real by abstracting these names and forms. Names and forms, well, they are temporary. We have to understand this word temporary. They are not permanent. They are continuously in a flux. When we understand something as temporary, its automatic outcome is that we don't get attached to it. Whenever you understand something as temporary, you won't get attached to it. Do you get ever attached to your seat in the plane? Never. I have not seen anybody shedding a tear. Oh my dear seat, I have to leave you. No. Why? Because we know that it is my seat for 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. But why do we get entangled in the things in the world here? Because we do not know that they are impermanent. I mean, intellectually we may know, but actually we think that it is permanent. And thus our life gets caught in unreality. What Vedanta tells us is only this. Let us base our life in reality. Let us be concerned with real things, not with imaginary things. One lady was arguing with me, just in a question-answer session. She had come from New York and was finding it, in that kind of a very busy life, in a, you can call it a rat race, but even the rats will not be fighting like that. And so it is. And so when she heard the discourse that about speaking the truth and so forth, she said, Swami, it's all okay in classrooms and all. In the real world, it doesn't work. In real world, you have to be street smart and so forth. She gave me about 5-7 minute long discourse on that. So, and then I said, but what you call as real world, is it a real world? It is not a real world. It is just made up world, the world of names and forms. And that is why it is always going to be full of misery. It is not that the frustrations that we feel in our lives is accidental. This frustration is brought about and very certainly brought about by our misperception. It is, just imagine, will I not get frustrated if I have, say, a mirror in front of me, and then I see in the mirror that there is a smudge on my cheek. And then if I keep on scrubbing it on the mirror, how long will I have to scrub it? I will get frustrated. This is what the reason for our frustration is. Remove it from here, and in the mirror also it will get removed. That is what Vedanta tells us. It is nothing more than that. Very simple ideas really. That look at the reality. So this conversion, is to be done in understanding these principles, and this understanding has to percolate in our day-to-day life. This part, percolation of these ideas in our daily life is what is called yoga. Yoga is this practical aspect. If we want to really divide into theory and practice, really they are all one. But this practice is that what we intellectually may be understanding, but that has to become an experiential reality for us. That is what makes what is called yoga. And therefore, you will see in Bhagavad Gita that every chapter, the colophon of every chapter says Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre. Each chapter has this title, Arjuna Vishad Yogo Nama. What is this yoga? Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvade. Say first chapter, Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama Prathamodhyaya. What is this yoga, Arjuna Vishada Yoga? Brahma Vidya and Yoga Shastra. That is Bhagavad Gita. It is Vidya. Means brings you the understanding, but not just the theoretical understanding, but the practical implementation of it. Yoga Shastra, Brahma Vidya, Yoga Shastra, together. And each aspect of our life is to be looked upon like that. Like the first misery that came in Arjuna's life, the that very depressing situation that he fell in, that despondency that he was going through. Now despondency comes in everybody's life, but it has to become a yoga, a lesson that can illumine our life. So this is how this whole Vedanta is taught by Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, of course, as a yoga, a practical science. And so, as Nivedita describes it, this is a matter where then all different, otherwise quarreling and disharmonious aspects of life come into a wonderful harmony. Vedanta brings this, there is no distinction between, say, sacred and secular. This is a fictitious distinction that we create, that this is a sacred thing and this is a secular thing. Sister Nivedita points out that with Swami Vivekananda, henceforth, no distinction between secular and sacred. Everything is sacred. It is only the way we look at it. So these looks have to be changed. Sacred as well as spiritual, secular, they have to be one. It is what it means is everything has to be converted into a spiritual journey. So every action becomes a worship. The science and religion, they become harmoniously joined in the pursuit of truth in this Vedantic doctrine. There is no conflict really. The truth seen through the mesh or the instrumentality of five senses, you get it, you get physical science. When you remove that, it becomes the spirituality or religious science. Then there is no really contradiction between faith and reason. Harmoniously they blend together, and there is no contradiction even between individual and social. They also have to come together. And in this dynamic presentation of Vedanta by Sri Ramakrishna Vivekananda, they do become together. That is why the motto for this order given by Swami Vivekananda is Atmano Mokshartham Jagadhitaya Cha, for the liberation of oneself and for the welfare of the society. So friends, I thank you all for giving me a patient listening for how much, about hour and 7-8 minutes. And it is difficult to listen to this kind of discourses, and especially when I speak, people tend to feel drowsy and sleepy. It is quite natural, it is not their fault, it is my fault, I make things somewhat boring, and also I go on for 1 hour because I don't want to break your sleep too early. So it is, if you are sleeping, let you have your fill of sleep for a longer time. So, but if you have any questions, you can ask and we can discuss those.
You said that too much ritual things is not good. Something is making our world really too much complicated or it's not working. Anyway, I can hear you.
I can hear you, but I don't know about all others.
Okay, now is okay.
Yeah.
So, whereas if somebody loves somebody, like if I love Ramakrishna, I want to do everything my own, this my own way, right? Offering fruit, offering flower is coming from my heart.
Yeah.
So that's nothing wrong.
That is very good. In fact, it must be done. I don't remember having said anything against that.
No, my sanskar, that also coming, sometimes it's coming too much, ritual, clean
See, it is, you are right there. See, ritual is a very important, very necessary, essential aspect of our spiritual journey. No doubt about that. What is sometimes you find in Vivekananda's literature or in Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, censuring not exactly rituals, but mere rituals without the emotional or the devotional aspect associated with it. It is good, if you go and sit in a train or bus to undertake a journey. But if it is not moving at all, if it is stationary, then just sitting there and imagining that you are going somewhere is not useful. So, just merely sticking to the rituals, and not only that, considering that that is the way that that means practicing religion, that is very harmful. Because not only that prevents you from moving forward, this has a fanatic aspect associated with it. Then you think that everybody must perform these rituals. And that is, you universalize that everybody must offer fruits, this, that, and they have to be cut in this particular manner, it has to be distinct, and unless they are washed in Ganges water, they cannot be offered, and all such things you make them mandatory for everybody. And if they are not doing it, you curse them, they are not religious people, not only that, they are bad people. That is how our psychology works. There is one MIT psychologist, I like to read his writings, Steven Pinker. So Steven Pinker has made these very nice observations that when we choose something just as a matter of liking, without any ethical component to it, then we don't make it universal. You may say, our Kripa Mayananji would say, I like Tim Horton coffee, I may say, I like Dunkin' Donut. But then we do not bring the roof down on that issue, we won't say that those who, he will not say that, well, you like Dunkin' Donut, such people should be eliminated from the world. We don't go to that extent, But if you accept, something on ethical grounds, that this is right, this is moral, I am taking it not because I like it, but because this is right, then you tend to make it universal. Since this is right, if it is not done, it is not right. And therefore those who don't do it, they are not good people. Not only that, you say they have no right to live on this earth, they are polluting the earth. So let us eradicate all those infidels or non-believers. That is how one becomes fanatic, if their attention is only on rituals. Therefore, we have to understand that rituals are essential, necessary, but they are useful only if they are vehicles to the principles. Otherwise, they are just dead skeletons, no use at all. In that one doctor's office, an orthopedic surgeon's office was getting shifted to a new place. So now they have a skeleton, that kept there in the office. So that skeleton also was being taken on a cart to the new place. Somebody was pushing the cart, and one lady asked that, hey, where is this being taken? And that person pushing said, to the doctor's office. And that lady said, well, you may take, but I think it is rather too late. So, because it is just skeleton, So rituals tend to become just skeletons, and it is just waste of time. So that is only the concern, They gradually peter into rigid customs and so forth.
Another question.
There are some others also.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Suppose Shakti and Shaktiman. If I am Shakti, I want to be Shakti, merge with Shaktiman. I have to climb, I have to go through this, but maybe I'm hearts and heard away, I'm practicing, but I don't know how. Always I think he is the one who is guiding me and taking me the way back. He is the one showing me. That's the way it's coming. So sometimes it's remaining like that, like it's a heart glued or something. But Shakti and Shaktiman, this road is not easy, Maharaj.
Well, it is Shakti and Shaktiman are not to be differentiated. Shakti and Shaktiman are same.
Yes.
It is they go together and they need not be separated. But that analogy doesn't work here when you say a ritual and the vehicle that the ritual becomes for a principle. The ritual gets carried on. The principle just gets dropped off, and thus it is of no use. Therefore, one has to be very particular, and then it becomes a rigid custom. That becomes just the way the religion gets followed. Forgetting that historically those customs were not there, and yet people were very religious. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult. People cannot do things in a united way. In one Hindu temple there in our New England area, so much of quarrel came up because they had an image of Durga was installed there. Now there were South Indian devotees and Bengali devotees. Now Bengali said no, Durga has to have 10 hands, and the South Indian said has to have only 8 hands. It is now in the scriptures there is the description of Ashtabhuja and Dashabhuja, but then because of that you are accustomed to one kind of ritual, another is accustomed to another kind of ritual, and then it becomes a quarreling point. Neither of them is really that feeling the divine presence, only they become the quarreling points, that's all. So it is like Sri Ramakrishna said, well, that have you seen God, whether God is with form or without form? Keep on quarreling, nobody has known, so there is nothing that the quarrel can be resolved by. So that is the important thing, that ritual, very good as a carrier of love. Like we have, some people denounce rituals. One of our members, a very nice devotee, well, God is in everybody, why you have to do, this flower offering and fruit offering, oh God, take this fruit. God is in everyone, why you should have to do this? You have to see justice, see the God everywhere, that's all. What are these rituals are not necessary. Then I asked him, well, hey, do you love your wife? Yes. Now loving is enough, isn't it? Why do you have to give her a present on birthday? Why do you have to go and hug her and give her a kiss? Isn't it just a ritual? And that can be done even without the love. You see that in the stage shows and movies, people can do it without even the slightest love being wasted there. So, because these actions, These rituals need not always be vehicles of the emotions, but the emotions to become dynamic, they need some vehicles. Still, we become so illumined that the emotions are spontaneously expressed without any particular ritualistic vehicle. Yeah.
Swamiji, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. It really made my day coming from St. Catherine's to hear you especially, and I'm very much humbled by your presentation. I want to, it's not so much a question, but more or less observation in terms of your remark, which I think your entire speech, your presentation is on the language subject. When you speak about name and form, finding the substance of name and form, which is a very original way of bringing both the practical aspect of it as well as the underlying philosophical idea. After all, this was the idea that Plato talked about in terms of forms, theory of forms, and then he got into trouble with Aristotle in terms of what do you mean by forms, when he went on to explain himself about the underlying idea of ideas, the whole concept of ideology, which has brought us into the kind of problems we have in the world today. I think you've made that so beautiful, so nicely presented, and I think it really brings together this whole idea of Advaita Vedanta so nicely. Thank you so much.
Oh, I feel so honored just by your coming to listen to me. You are a highly world-renowned, honored scholar, author of so many wonderful books, and your very presence was an inspiring thing, and thank you for your appreciating wonderful remarks. Thank you.
Hello. One simple question to you. It was actually asked by my granddaughter. She's 7 years and she's now becoming mature, but I couldn't answer the question. So she asked me, and from a Hindu point of view, she asked me, who made me?
Who made me? Yeah, that's a very profound question. Who?
7 years old. Just.
Yeah. But many such children, they ask very nice questions, and I can identify, I can very easily empathize with her, because I also used to feel this question when I was very young, that who made me, how did I come into existence? This is a question that actually children feel. And later on, actually as we grow up, this question gets smothered really. If we can keep up with this question, we would find the answer. But as we advance in age, the other attractions, they become more important, and this question doesn't find, therefore, that place it deserves, that who made me or who am I. In Vedanta, the query is more like who am I? Who am I? But it is very similar, who made me? Yes, the question, if depends on her personality. One answer to is, nobody made you. You have always been. That is one way of answering it. Made means you were not before being made. So your existence is only during some time. If you are made, then you are going to be destroyed also. You were made and you will be unmade. So it is, but you were never made, you were always there. That is one way of answering that. The other way is also, it is more devotional. God made you. You belong to God. God is your reality. That is how the original idea in Christianity was like that God made us, means we are gods. Progeny of human beings are human. Progeny of God is divine. That is how Master Eckhart presents it. That the divinity is our underlying reality. So you can tell the answer like that as well, that you are made by God. The story goes, that one little girl, like your granddaughter maybe, asked this to her mother, who made me? And she told, well, you are made by God. But then just now, you told, but my dad was telling that we came from monkeys. And then the mother said, oh, he was talking about his side of family. Yes, please.
Good morning, Maharaj. Whatever I do, whenever I'm trying to eat something, I always close my eyes and offer to Thakur. So one day my mom noticed it and told me that, what are you doing? It's not okay. So you have to sit, you have to pray to him. So on that day, the dilemma started in my mind. I always believe in my mother. So am I doing it wrong? So is it the right way of doing this? Or should I listen to my mother, or should I listen to my own heart? So I just need that to be answered by you. Thank you.
You want to start a quarrel between your mother and me? Actually, it is. Both these things need not be in contradiction. It is, the idea is to be very sincere about offering to God. If that idea is intact, then it is all right done in any way. But if done properly, means as your mother has advised you, if you sit in a particular way, and if you feel that particular way of sitting and folding hands and praying makes you more sincerely offering things, then what is the problem? So it is the question of how efficacious our offering becomes. That is the only thing. We want to offer very good. But suppose, we are here to sit and eat food, and somebody, imagine, somebody is serving us, it is not a buffet, and somebody goes, hey, take it. Then is it an offering, or somebody more with proper manners and observing the proper these ways of requesting? What will you enjoy better? So it is like that. Thank you.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Just a simple question, like the word duality. Duality is a very confusing word to me. So could you elaborate on that?
Duality is very confusing. Somewhat your question is also a bit confusing to me. Duality and unity, they are complementary in a way. Unity is the underlying principle. In the world, everything that we see, there is always the subject-object duality. Even if we say one, it involves many. and when we say many, it involves one. I like that. I tell about it many times. Many of you must have heard this before today from me, that it is one little child, in the school was being tested for the understanding of grammar. The teacher was teaching about numbers, and she asked the question just to test. Okay, tell me, pant. Pant, is it singular or plural? And the brilliant child says that on the upper side it is singular, on the lower side it is plural. So in the same way, the duality or being one, it's really a deep philosophical subject if you look at it. Everything as an entity, could become one. Like you say congregation, a singular, but then each of us in the congregation becomes many. A person, say one, Yogatmananda one. But if you look at my different organs, that is many. If you look at the number of cells, it becomes trillions or whatever. So it is. This duality is the ultimate subject-object duality. That is where the Sankhya philosophy comes to conclusion, that it is always the perceiver and the perceived. Vedanta takes a step further, saying that, there is no two there. The perceiver and perceived, they are united in a way. United is not exactly the word used, but they are one appearing as many. That is, the Shankaracharya uses that word adhyasa, superimposition. That the multiplicity is superimposed on unity, because unity does not go away. Multiplicity comes and goes. And so therefore unity is always there. Multiplicity is superimposed, and when something is superimposed on something else, then that underlying thing does not undergo any change by the perceived superimposed thing. You may see in that water, as you said, drive, we often see that. There is suddenly appears, is it raining there? Because of the visual, what is called mirage. So you see it, but there is, just because of your seeing, not that water actually comes there. It is a visual deception. So this multiplicity is visual deception. So that is how you can, even while this multiplicity is, you have to understand it on the basis of unity. And that is how I can present it. I don't know if my answer was helpful, but so many thanks, friends.
We are very thankful to Swami Ratmanandi Maharaj for a brilliant talk and marvelous question and answers, and thankful to the questions that came. And his answers were not only to particular to the questions, but they elaborated a lot, so we should not take it personal. But there are many things we have got from the questions, more than answering the question. It was very widespread and very fundamental questions of the life were answered in his answers. So thank you very much, Maharaj, and today after the closing chant, we will go upstairs and we will come forward, pronounce to the altar, and we will go upstairs and we will have prasad. And for tomorrow, we are again starting at 11 o'clock, and I hope that you all will be able to come and do the opening ceremony for the renovated Vedanta Society of Toronto. the renovation is not fully complete, but it's almost complete. And you heard from Swami Vivekananda, I was telling him, Swamiji, we thought we'd complete. Swamiji said it happened this way. He gave many examples. And Kumar also told me that when we started this building in 1995, it was also like this. So this is the regular thing that it's very difficult to finish the thing in time. So, but a lot of work has been done, and vigorously it has been done with the support of all of you. It's fantastic work has been done. So, thank you very much for attending to this thing, and see you all tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Now, the closing hands. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Jai Mahamai Ki Jai. Jai Swami Ji Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jai Bhagavan Buddha Ki Jai. Jai Isha Musha Ki Jai. Sarvastartu Durgami Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu Sarvasarbuddhimapnotu Sarvatra Nandatu. Hari Om Tat Sat. May all be freed from dangers. May all realize what is good. May all be actuated by noble thoughts. May all rejoice everywhere. Oh, peace, peace, peace be unto